It's the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast, where we talk about all things consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, swinging, and all things about how you can have a secure and sexy relationship. Now here's your hosts, Tara and Andre. Hey, Andre.
Hey, Tara.
How's it going?
It's going well, thanks. How's it going with you?
Great. Well, welcome everyone to the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast. We're your hosts, Tara and Andre. I'm Tara. I'm a relationship and awesomeness coach specializing in supporting people with consensual non-monogamous relationships.
And I'm Andre Turcott. I am a sex-positive psychotherapist.
So we're the co-founders of this podcast and of the community by the same name, Let's Talk Polyamory. And we help couples and individuals navigate non-monogamy. And so we do it through this podcast, through our courses and trainings that we do. And yeah, that's us.
Yeah.
So you can check us out on our website, which will be listed in the show notes.
Cool.
And on to today's episode.
Right.
This is an interesting one.
It sure is.
One of the questions I think, Andre, I get asked often, maybe you do too, is can opening my relationship, or we'll put in brackets, monogamous long-term relationship,
Marriage,
save my marriage?
Yeah.
So do you get asked that question very often?
Yeah, quite a bit actually. When people are going through some difficulty with their relationship, with their marriage, and they're thinking about, maybe it's not me, maybe it's us, or maybe there's some alternative to it, or whatever it is, and they come across this thing. And I think polyamory is becoming much more common in our daily vocabulary. And maybe 20 years ago we didn't hear about it very often, but today it's becoming much more accessible. So people are starting to consider that and saying, like, yeah, would it help fix my marriage? And I think initially most people right off the bat would say, no, it's not going to fix your marriage. It's actually going to probably blow it up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think conventional wisdom would say that, no, it's not. If there's anything going on in the relationship that's not working, that probably it's not going to work. And I know I've said that as recent as the last couple of months when I met up with an old boyfriend who told me that their relationship was ending, and one of their friends had suggested an open relationship. And, so that's what we would have said in the past. I think,
but now we're coming to rethink it, right? Now we're we're modifying our answer to say that maybe we modify our marriage, that maybe being in a open relationship like this could actually be one of the things that is most stimulating for it. Maybe there are some things that you could benefit from. So, but we also want to kind of qualify that and saying, well, it depends, right? Because if you have certain core issues in your marriage, opening it up isn't really going to be the catalyst for that, and it's not going to be the cure for that. So those core issues in themselves may be the qualifiers or disqualifiers, and maybe you're not a great candidate for it, but maybe you are, and maybe having an open relationship like this could really increase the quality of the relationship.
Yeah, you could build the qualifications though. So if you don't qualify now, given the circumstances in your relationship, there is a possibility that you can. And so we're going to talk a bit about that too.
Right.
So, because there's so many rewards, I would say, and to being in an open relationship. And, there's also reasons why people want to stay in a marriage. And so we're going to talk about that too. So I liked your idea of a modified marriage. When we were preparing for this, you were talking about that term, and I'm like, oh, I kind of like that. So you get to have sort of the benefits of being in a marriage, and you can enjoy that. And we're going to talk about that in a second, but and also have the benefits of more excitement and more interest and, continued awesomeness, I guess.
Yeah. And like we've stated before, we're not, poo-pooing marriage. I mean, there's wonderful aspects of it, right? And, maybe modifying, tweaking a couple of things, looking at certain things would really increase the quality of your relationship. But marriage in itself can be a wonderful thing. It can be fantastic to have that knowledge of the other person, to have a secure way of being that, you can depend on each other, all those great things. But maybe it's not the marriage that you inherited or that your grandparents might have had. Maybe there are some things that we can recognize as, well, maybe some of those tenets aren't exactly ideal. So to say that I'm going to be your ever after and I'm going to be your only option, it sounds romantic, but is it really viable? Is it really realistic to think that we're going to put everything on the other person? And also, what's it like for me to be the recipient of that? Thinking that, well, Absolutely. I've got to live up to all of your fantasies. I have to always be the one that's going to be stimulating you, or all these other things, right? So it doesn't have to be a binary thing. It's either we're in or out. We could say, well, we love so many aspects of being married. We love so many aspects of being in a long-term committed relationship, but there are some things that we might be better served if we're able to modify. But all that comes back to the idea, how do we communicate? What's our level of jealousy? There's some core things that we want to look at first and foremost.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about all those
Yeah.
things. So before we do, though, I'm going to ask you a question, Andre.
Yeah. Okay. Spring it on.
Okay, so it's not a secret for anyone who's listened to us before, and so you have admitted several times in the past that you've been a cheater.
It's true, and been cheated on,
and been cheated on,
yeah,
and
ways,
me too. I've been a cheater and been cheated on.
Right.
So, do you think that opening a relationship, like think back to when you were actually married,
right. The first time.
Sure, the first time. Let's go with the first time.
Yeah, let's go with the first time.
Would it have saved your marriage?
If I had been open about it?
Yeah.
Well,
if you'd opened your relationship.
If I'd opened my relationship, well, I guess it depends on what we mean by open. If we would have had open communication, yes, I think it would have definitely helped to address it. So back then, I didn't know about attachment styles. I didn't know what my attachment style was like. And I think I got kind of nervous about finding myself in a relationship. So I went out and found ways to deconstruct it, to blow it up, to sabotage. Whereas if I had been open about my reservations, open about my fears, had open communications, then I think we could have found a way to recognize that and work within it. So yes, I think it's quite likely that our relationship would have lasted much, much longer.
Yeah. But I mean, not just that, though, to the sexual aspect of it too. If could you be with other people and not had to cheat.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And didn't feel as though I had to cheat. Yeah, and it would have totally changed. But also, it's interesting. I think we're going to talk a bit about this later on. Is the idea I cheated on her, so I was sexual with somebody else. But then when it came to be known, it was less about my actually physically being with another person and more about the lying, the cheating. And it's like, well, what else have you lied about? And when you said you loved me, did you really mean that? So all those things come into question, right?
Absolutely.
So it wasn't so much about the sexual idea. It was about how are we communicating? What was our level of trust and honesty? What about you? Would it have influenced your marriage? Would it have changed them?
That's a good question. So I was married once, like when I was really young, and also then in a long-term relationship for about 7 years. If I think back to the marriage, would it have saved it? I mean, I was really young then. And I think the thing about getting married young is that you don't always totally know yourself or know necessarily the person that you're meeting, and you fall in love with this idea. And I think that was not the core issue with us. I think the core issue was a difference in values. We were both still growing and learning and evolving as humans. So I don't know if it would have saved it. I suppose if we'd stayed together long enough, maybe it could have come up, but I don't think that was the core issue for that one. So in that case, when values are so misaligned, unless you can line up those values and things, then it might not work for you. So.
But it's interesting you say, when we get into the marriage and then how we might be and how we might change over time, and is there room for changing, right? Because we do take on a different way of being, but we're changing. Should the marriage change with us as well? Can we modify the way that we relate? And also, if we go in one direction, we say, okay, let's open up the marriage. Can we ever close it again? Should we ever close it again? Right? Can we ever come back?
Well, the thing is, like you said, we do modify it, but we modify it in such a gradual way, in a way that's maybe acceptable in some ways. Like, why can't we modify other aspects of it? So let's first talk about marriage and people get married, because I think that's important.
Sure,
and like we said, not poo-pooing marriage. We know many people that are married. We know people that are married and have an open relationship and works amazing for them. So it's kind of what inspired this topic. Also, we know people that are not being honest, and so that's another reason for having this conversation. So,
and also to say that while we are in an open relationship, when we're not married, we do have many of the trappings of being married, right? We are partnered in many ways.
So Oxford definition is marriage is legally or formally recognized union of two people as partners in a personal relationship.
Yeah, so I take exception with it right there. Legally or formally recognized, but I know of many people who are married in their hearts and are not legally recognized.
Well, marriage. It has a connotation of being a legal agreement, and that's part why people like it. So Merriam-Webster, the state of being united to a person as a spouse in a legal, consensual, and contractual relationship recognized and sanctioned by and dissolvable by law.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're actually married legally to someone, you have to actually dissolve it legally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could separate, but then if you ever wanted to legally get married again, you could not.
Right. And even if you're separated, you may still be considered legally married, right?
Yeah.
So just because you've decided, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is so. But I think there's also times when you could just appear as though you are together and then be considered married.
Yes. Well, people think we're married all the time.
Right. But there are times when people cohabitate without the intention of coupling and marrying that way, and it's not recognized. And then there are other people who might be in a trouble who are not extended those same privileges or responsibilities.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's kind of narrow in a
yeah, it's usually a dyad situation, two people, you know, and being common law is often legal as well. Yeah. Even if you haven't signed an actual contract, the mere fact of living with a person consistently time, right? For a certain amount of time.
Yeah,
I think it's like a year in Canada is considered you have the same protection of law.
Yeah.
And so even though I wasn't married to my 7-year partner, I could have divorced him in a similar way, asked for similar protections as I would have if we actually got married. So, yeah.
And then there are some marriages that are not recognized, right? Like same-sex marriages, unfortunately, in a lot of places still, they're not being recognized that way.
Yeah. And so the reason people get married and get that legal contract is it's for the legal contract for sure, because there's some security around that. It provides security for yourself, any offspring you might have, that sort of thing. So it has many benefits. And so for many people, they get married because they want to go on that relationship escalator. They want their relationship with a person to continue to evolve over time. And then there's security and comfort and certainty. And certainty is a value that many people have. Something is going to continue and be ongoing, and there's some comfort in that. So it could be part of your core value.
But that's not to say that you couldn't have those things if you're not in a committed marriage.
That's true. But for some people, that's what they want.
Right. They're attracted by that. They're attracted by the idea that if they were to take this step, do this legal thing or this spiritual ceremony, this process, that it would then give them all of these other things like the security, like the knowledge that we have this bond.
And the other part about marriage is the concept of that one of the core aspects being that you're only going to have sex with one person for the end of time, unless you divorce or separate, right? And for some people, that's comforting as well, is that no one is going to take this person from me, and it's that idea of ownership in some way.
In some ways.
Yeah.
But does it create a false expectation, thinking, well, all I have to do is get behind this piece of paper or this recognized ceremony, and then somehow it's going to diminish all the possible things that could interfere with my way of being, right? We're married. I know I'm safe now.
Yeah, but you've seen the movies where someone's like, I'm just going to nail that guy down and get him to marry me and everything will be fine. He'll stop cheating. He'll stop doing this thing. I won't feel insecure. Right. But in fact, you may still feel insecure. The piece of paper, the legal agreement doesn't change the person and who they are. Right. So, there's not so great reasons to get married too, right? If you're trying to pin someone down, because, something people don't tend to stay pinned down unless they want to be. So. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess the point really is that what's our motive in getting married? Are we wanting to kind of create this feeling or this illusion of security, right? So do I need to take that step in order to feel secure? And yet there are other people that never make this step, that never take this pledge and have created very secure, loving bonds with their partners. And I think when you're not...
I know some people that are like in this room.
When you're not under that legal obligation, some people argue, well, that's a demonstration of your desire each and every day to continue or not. Whereas when you're married, you say, well, you know what, it's not really working, but it's just so hard to get out of this marriage. I might as well just stay because, it's going to cost me too much financially or emotionally. So we'll just stay that way. And is that really the sense of security you're wanting compared to not being in a actual formal commitment? You choose each day whether you want to be there. And then when you do that, maybe the person says, well, yeah, that makes me feel secure because I know they're here because they want to be and not because they feel contractually obligated.
Yeah, and that's certainly, I think, what the sentiment I would have. But others might argue, parents, for example, that obviously they don't want to commit to you if they're not going to get married. It's like, well, I also don't want to get married. So it's a perfect situation. So, it's also finding the right balance for you, right? Some people would want to get married, some people don't want to get married. Where are we? Okay.
Where are we?
So we were talking about the sex thing and how that this is the core aspect of being married and this legal agreement is that basically you're saying is I'm only going to have sex with you for the rest of our lives. And this, and and it does tend to be at the beginning of a relationship, at the beginning of a marriage, one of the things that's, great. I mean, hopefully it's great if you're getting married to the person.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder how many people decide to get married because there's a whole bunch of reasons, right? They love this person, their best friend, they trust whatever, but they say, well, the sex is just so, but that's okay. I'm getting everything else. Yeah. Maybe the sex isn't so great.
Yeah. Well, and some people don't want to have sex. Like they'll have sex before they get married and then not have it. That could be a thing, which is maybe another good reason to consider opening a relationship if you're asexual, for example. You may want to be in a loving, committed, married relationship, but you may not want to have sex as frequently as a partner.
Oh, that's interesting. Right. So your sex drive, your desire for sex may not match your partner's. So having an open relationship, doing it ethically might say, well, you know what? We still have all these wonderful things together, but we don't really enjoy playing tennis at the same frequency. So why don't you go play tennis with somebody else and come back and, we'll still have all these things. So, but it's done in a collaborative way that is consensual, right? Yeah. We're able to both say, yes, this is something that we would agree on. And actually, it doesn't make it feel as though you're not interested in me. It's that I'm also wanting you to go out and find your pleasures, and I'm not threatened by that. I'm secure in the knowledge that you still want to be.
Actually, I met somebody when I spoke at Oasis who talked about being asexual and polyamorous and how they love being in relationships. They love so many aspects of it. They love the cuddling. They love the giving. They love the connection and all that. They just know that it's not in their interest to provide sex, like actual physical sex. And so, people often will consent to that, but then they sometimes find themselves in a position where the person thinks they're going to change and then they don't. And so, being upfront and open about those things is super important. But, a person like that might want to be in a marriage, get married, but have an open relationship where, the other person has the freedom to have their sexual needs met elsewhere.
But, we talk about the benefit of opening marriage and having the sexual possibilities, but also the same is true emotionally, right? Because
absolutely,
I was in a long-term asexual relationship, and we got a lot of emotional connection from each other, and without the implication of sex or the possibility of sex, but we still were very gratified and felt the emotional connection of being with others, and that's another component to it as well, right? Not only do we say, well, we are going to forsake the physical sexual demonstration with others, but emotionally we might say, well, I don't want anybody else coming too close to each other, to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
But yet what we're saying is that in many of these relationships, there is the emotional content, there is the intellectual stimulation that we get by being with other people, and it needn't threaten us or be the thing that's going to devastate our marriage, that it could in fact be another stimulator, that I've gone out with somebody, I've had an exchange with them, I've been, gratified in that way. I feel kind of this new injection of sorts, this emotional way of being. And then I come back and I feel re-energized. I feel as though it's not constantly on you to always be the go-to, or it's not always on me to be the go-to, regardless of whether it's emotional, sexual, or otherwise.
Yeah, I think because when people get married, sometimes you forget that you're individuals and that you used to be an individual with friends and things like that. And people tend to isolate themselves more. And I think, I mentioned the sex thing is because it's the most common thing that comes up.
Yeah.
And so people do live in relationships that are sort of sexless or unsatisfied for really long times and because they don't want to have the conversations.
But we often do lose ourselves in it, right? And even if we try to maintain it, we might be seen as the couple, as the we, right? So, what are you guys doing tomorrow? It's, we get grouped into it, and it could be wonderful. We're actually included. But at some point, you might say, well, I entered into this as an individual and thought that I would still be my individual ways, but with, all the benefits and all the compromise and all those wonderful considerations. But at one point, I kind of lost sight of it. And now I've become just part of, which, has its good and bads. But could we ever maintain some of our way? Do we have to change? Do we change?
Yeah, I think it's important to maintain that individuality, whether you're in a monogamous marriage or relationship, or you're polyamorous, I think it's important for us all to maintain some of our independence. And I think that's what keeps it interesting. If you're all things to one person and your entire world centers around them, it's going to get boring.
I thought you were going to talk about the study in psychology today.
And we're going on to that. So I talked about the sex part because I think, the sex part can threaten the relationship, but so can a breach of trust.
Sure.
So in that article, it talks about how marriage changes people.
Nice.
And so it changes more than your living circumstances and your daily routines. It also changes your personality. And I found this was interesting in this article because they said, we talked about self-identity, but, it can, change your personality, and they say that this article said, and, agree with us or not agree with us, is that men generally become more conscientious and introverted than when they were single.
Interesting. So they become more conscientious of their partner and their partner's needs and how they would be in it. So in other words, when they're by themselves, they're just single dudes doing their thing and don't have to have as much of a level of consideration or conscientiousness.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've heard people say that even in long-term relationships, that they see themselves when they're in those relationships as a provider. And they actually relish that role. And that's the level of consciousness that they want. Like, I'm providing for my person. You know what I mean? And I think that's interesting. And then they say that women become more emotionally stable. Which is
stable.
Maybe because it takes away the uncertainty. And I think women generally, generalizing, tend to want more stability. And seek to marry to have that stability. I mean, it's what they teach us. You should get married, tie that person down, right? I said that at the beginning.
Okay. But in that kind of established relationship, it helps us to feel more stable. It creates a condition of security. But then, does that mean that if we were to modify or open up the relationship, I'm going to feel less stable? Or could I maintain some of that constant? Could I maintain the emotional stability?
Well, I maintain that you can not only maintain it, but you could actually grow it. It could feel more stable. I mean, it seems crazy, and people who who aren't familiar with, have never opened up a relationship or been non-monogamous, are like, I don't understand how that could actually make you feel more stable. But it can, and there's so many different ways.
Well, we were also, and I think maybe we talk about this a bit later as well, but we were talking about how the question of trust often comes up, and how surprisingly, we might actually increase our level of trust in opening our relationship as opposed to feeling as though there's no trust in it.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting phenomenon?
Well, part of it is because of communication, right? If you're openly communicating, you know what your partner's doing, you're not wondering, you're not creating stories, you trust. And then, and that's not to say it's perfect, because lots of people who are in open or polyamorous relationships or swingers, they cheat too. Like, you can cheat in non-monogamy as well. It doesn't mean you just open the door to everything. There's certain conditions and things that need to be met.
Well, there's some big categories, I guess, right? There's polyamory, there's consensually non-monogamy, and ethically non-monogamous, right? So, but we talk about the ethics in it. So, for example, if I were to go out and have an affair and I slept with somebody and you find out about it, you initially might say, wow, you slept with this other person. But soon the actual physical sexual part becomes secondary. And what really comes into play is, well, if you lied about this, what else might have you lied about?
Well,
what other things? So when you said you liked me, when you said you loved me, when you said you were at work, whatever it is, do we start to re-question all those things, right?
Absolutely.
So it really does play to our trust. Whereas if we're ethical about it and open, we say, well, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I want to do. And then you can come to trust that and say, well, I know that they're forthcoming. I know that they're going to tell me how they're feeling, even if I sometimes feel hesitant or threatened by it, or initially, right, I might say like, well, I'm not sure, but I know that I can trust them to tell me what's going on. So that's maintained. You might not always like what you're going to hear, but you learn to communicate in these open ways, what really helps to establish the trust. And also in like what we've done, we might have dated together or even apart, and we say, well, I've gone through this experience, we've shared this together, and that makes me feel like I can really trust that we'll be there and we'll talk about it. And it might not always turn out swimmingly, it might go south a little bit, but we can talk about it. And I know that I can trust our communications abilities, our abilities to be open and honest.
Right, because we've built the solid foundation for that, but it's not always there when you first decide to open up.
No, I wasn't this kind of communicator when we first started out.
Well, me neither. But okay. I was thinking about something. Oh, that article. I wanted to say one last thing that it said, because I thought we both thought this was interesting. It says when you're married, over time, you tend to become less agreeable.
What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I think you can tend to focus on more the negative things. You see the things that are wrong rather than things that are amazing. Because I think when we first get to know someone, everything is good, right? You've said it before. We would never, like, we've had situations come up for us, and you'd say we would never have talked to each other like this when we were first dating, ever. Right. And then you get accustomed to someone, and then you know, and that comfort's amazing, but it also allows in other things. So.
Right. So the article tends to make that acknowledgement that you might become less agreeable over time in that relationship. So maybe there are certain aspects that you find frustrating, or you feel they're never going to be changed. But I wonder then, does that speak to the fantasy or the merits of being open? You could say, well, maybe I don't accept everything in my marriage. Maybe not everything is acceptable, but I can find another person who would be more in line with that, or who would accept it more. Or, you know, so does that alternative, that possibility of alternative, make it kind of more inviting, more interesting? And if I think that you're going to go with somebody who is treating you well, is that going to make me want to treat you a little bit better? Right? I'm not taking you as much for granted, possibly.
Possibly. But again, there's certain things that you have to put in place, because some people just open their relationship and then just take off and then neglect their partner altogether. And that's not the right thing to do. But I mean, the idea that we're looking at is opening a relationship under favorable conditions, which we're going to talk about.
Right. Yeah. You know, there's structure to it, right? There are ways of doing it in a way that's going to help you succeed, and do it in a way there's going to be consideration and compassion done with it. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not just, I mean, while this is part of the benefit is to get out of the routine and the predictable, and, you know, you're rather than being resentful, you might be dealing with more excitement and that sort of thing in your relationship because of these new things. But, you know, those are also things to work on in advance. Like, don't come in feeling resentful or that sort of thing, or you may, you know, it could expand it even more. And so we actually did a 4-part series on reigniting the fire in your long-term relationship, which is about, you know, connecting with your partner again. So if you missed that, you should take a look at it. Yeah. But it can be the thing that might be needed, and it can work for some people.
But again, just to restate what our position is, that we're not saying that we're going to totally blow up our marriage. We're saying that there's many great aspects of our marriage that are there, and there may be some core issues that we're going to look at, but that in itself, opening a relationship may be very stimulating and gratifying. It might actually bring you closer, as opposed to a misconception that it's going to separate you.
Yeah. So some of the benefits we talked about: so deeper connection, open communication, because you must have it, trust, emotional and sexual stimulation. Like, meeting new people is stimulating.
It sure is. Yeah, we know a couple, right, that they really thrive on meeting new people all the time, and it doesn't mean that it's even going to go the route of becoming sexual, but just the idea that they would meet these people and have that. So people are like, well, what's the difference between meeting new people at the club where we play gin? Like, why does it have to be sexual? Why does it have to be emotional? Because there is some extra component to it, right? There is some kind of tension that comes. There is some kind of greater gratification that comes. Playing gin is wonderful, but sometimes it could remain rather superficial. And opening a relationship like this, whether it's sexual or emotional or otherwise, can really kind of like give a charge to it. It can be kind of exciting and fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it can be that way without threatening the foundation of the relationship, depending on like how you structure it, right? And that's why there's different styles of consensual non-monogamy, and you have to find like the one that works for you. We're just generalizing opening a relationship, but there's various versions of it. And I think the other big thing that you gain from opening your relationship is some personal growth, because you're going to have to grow a little bit. If you haven't grown, it's a good opportunity to do that. And the big one I think that people really love about having an open relationship is variety. And, you know, as the poet William Cowper said, variety is the spice of life, you know, that gives it all its flavor. And I think people highly value variety in their lives in point, so many things.
Yeah, for sure. But, you know, to say that you're going to open up and get variety, it should not be seen as a this or that. So in other words, it shouldn't be seen, well, you have to go open it up because I'm not enough for you. Because that already has a moral attachment to it, right? It's supposing that I should only be satisfied with this other person for the rest of my life. And if I don't subscribe to it, if I don't meet that, then it's automatically a failure, as opposed to saying, I love you and I love the things we have, but I also enjoy other people, other experiences, other opportunities, other things. So we want to try and remove the moral idea that this is somehow perverse, or that too much love is a bad thing, or that you should only have one type of love dedicated to this other person. That may work for some people, but for other people, they should also be allowed to have their own self-expression and to find out how it might work well for them.
Yeah, and I would argue as well that you may want that variety from other people, but you should also insert, and that's why we did that whole series, 4-part series, is insert variety into your own relationship. You said even yesterday, I think you said, it's like, it's amazing how we keep coming up with new things, trying new things, right? And I think that's an important in any relationship, long-term relationship, whether you're married or not married.
Yeah, no doubt.
Open or not open, right? Okay, so the big question. So how do I qualify? Am I ready to open my relationship? That was the big question. That's the one we started.
Not everybody's just ready? Not everybody's just
ready. Not everybody's just ready. And I think, we've certainly talked to a lot of people. If you're in any online organization groups, that things happen, and that, it could, for some people, it can blow things up. Because it may have been heading there anyways, to be honest.
I think that's the thing. It's like polyamory isn't going to blow up your relationship if you have good communication already. But if you already have issues of trust or jealousy or things, and it's not looked at first, then yes, this could kind of be like the miracle grow on it and make it go sideways.
Ending it.
Right. So before opening up, we want to find out, are we well suited for this? Are we well qualified for this? Right. And if not, what could we do? Because we can address some of those core issues.
Yeah, because they could heighten or shine a light on things that just, are already there, that you may even not realize, you may or may not realize are there. So here are the key qualifying. I'm saying qualify because it's just like, whether or not it's for you. Things that questions you can ask yourself. And if they're not a yes to all of them, then maybe you need to do some work and build those qualifications.
Yeah, I think qualifiers are good because it kind of alerts us, right? It gives us certain warning, in a sense, that let's not just jump into this without addressing some of the possible core issues first.
Yes.
We'll go to this if we think that we're good candidates. If we think that our relationship is solid enough, if we have good communication patterns, if we're able to trust each other in those things, then yes, maybe we're very good candidates. But if not, then maybe we need to look at some of the core issues at hand in our relationship.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the number one thing is, how do I or we communicate?
It's all like
now. So you may already be saying, like, I hear this all the time. I'm sure you do too. I'm a great communicator, right? Most couples are like, yeah, we're great at communication. And then they have issues and you're like, where, maybe you're good at communicating some things, but, some of the things that, you might want to consider are there conversations that I avoid? Is there anything my partner doesn't know about me that I haven't told them? Do I feel comfortable openly sharing my feelings with you and my needs and my wants? Or do I hide those things?
Right, sure.
And how do I communicate those things? Do I use I and me rather than you do this? Or, and the whole idea of nonviolent communication. And another one is active listening. Do I listen to my partner? Do I hear them? Because you and I can have opposing views on things, which we do. Most couples do, right? But can we listen to understand?
I think it was yesterday we were talking and you called me out on it. You said something and I was on to the next thing. You're like, you didn't listen to me. And I stopped.
Did I say you didn't listen to me? I said, oh, you interrupted.
Something like that. You interrupted.
I could have said that better.
Either way. No, but the good point for me is that I did hear it. I recognized it and I paused and I was like, yeah, I was not listening to you. I was already formulating my next thing that I wanted to go into, my response. I stopped listening to you. And yet, look at me, right? I'm a professional communicator, right? I mean, if I can't get it, well, no, but the thing is, we might think we're good communicators. Do our partners think we're good communicators?
Oh, that's actually a good one. Ask your partner. Do you think I'm a good communicator?
Right.
I'm not always a good communicator.
But point,
I try.
The point is, and if you followed us at all, you've heard us say communication. Opening up relationships or maintaining monogamous relationships, it's less about the sex, it's about the communication. Do the communication part well, and you have a chance of succeeding in life. I mean, how do you communicate to your parents? How do you communicate to your employer? How do you communicate all these things? We got to learn to communicate well. So opening up polyamory, our marriage could be okay, but what is the base for it? And it's the base is communication. How do we communicate with each other? Do we do it well? Do we really do it well? Are we able to communicate these things?
Yeah, and we in our Poly Newbies course and in our program, it's a whole module, and there's exercises, and it's the thing that we get you to practice the entire time, because it doesn't matter about all the other things. If you can figure out the communication part, you can work through all the other things. I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need to still have those foundation, but you have, if you can communicate, you can stop yourself, you can reset, you can,
Yeah, as long as we keep talking, we have a chance. In fact, there was a scale that had come up not too long ago about putting values to what couples did or did not do in the relationships that made them succeed or fail. And one of the biggest things was if they stopped talking. So as long as we continue to communicate, we might not always find our way to it right away, or we may have times where we're going to disagree. But as long as we continue to participate in the communication, we stand a chance. So all that to go back to say, it's one of the qualifiers. Do you communicate well? And if you don't communicate as well as you might want to or would benefit from, then that's something we can learn. We can learn to communicate well.
Yeah. And we talk about attunement communication. So being attuned to your partner and having the conversation and using active listening, and knowing when not to communicate. That's the other thing that happens to people when they first open a relationship, is that it's just like you talk all the time and then you just get exhausted from talking,
we hear that a lot.
And then you stop talking. Yeah. You know what I mean? So part of that is timing and tone and turf and all those things.
Yeah, and taking the temperature, recognizing, okay, we've been talking about the same subject for 3 hours now. I think it's time we take a break.
Yeah.
And we don't recommend talking for 3 hours straight session like that, but we will become considerate and compassionate when communicating.
Okay, so number 2 is, how do I experience jealousy?
The big jealousy question. Well, you know what? So many people say, and I've heard this, and tell me if you've heard this, I could never open up my relationship. I'm too jealous. So in a sense, what they're saying is, I need to preserve my jealousy and maintain it the way that it is, because I don't think it would ever be able to be modified or put in its right size or be able to look at or any of those things. So I will simply honor jealousy's role and avoid anything that might do. But there are other people who say, well, even though I'm married, I'm still jealous. I don't like when they do these things or these other things, right?
Yeah.
So the marriage thing didn't prevent or eradicate their level of jealousy. They're still just kind of hiding behind that idea that it's going to keep them from jealousy, and yet they may still feel very jealous in the relationship. And there are other people who have open relationships and say, well, I don't feel very jealous at all. What's the difference?
Yeah. And I think jealousy is something you can also work on, right?
Without a doubt.
And, there's this misconception that you have to be 100% not jealous. I actually talked about that in my voice talk as well. And I don't think you have to be not jealous. We all experience some sort of jealousy sometimes.
We have.
Yes, for sure.
Years, right?
And it's totally survivable. And so I think sometimes people say it would never work for me. It's because I could not be not jealous. And I think what if someone said to you, well, you don't have to be 100% not jealous.
Right. Yeah.
But learn how to address it or understand what's behind it. And then I think that's another part of, our programs is we talk about really digging in to understand where it's coming from.
So the idea that I'm jealous and I could never overcome it, that's not actual, right? It's no. Have you actually done the work to look at what the components of jealousy are?
Yeah.
And if you have done that, then you'd be willing to look at what is behind that. What's the key? Because we say, right, jealousy is an umbrella term for many different aspects, many different things that might be present. But being willing and able to look at those things, to do the so-called work in that, will modify your relationship to jealousy, and you will be able to right size it. As you said, doesn't mean that we may never feel jealous, but we will feel better equipped to deal with our jealousies, whether we're in a closed monogamous relationship or an open relationship.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. It's exactly, you read my mind.
I did. It's written right there at the bottom.
Weird. Because I was just going to say, I was talking to a client recently who I work with on another matter, and it was really cute because she was saying how, she, in front of her husband, she said she was in the elevator and somebody gave her a once over, a very obvious once over. And she's like, it felt really good. And he was like, yeah, that's awesome. But some people might cause them jealousy. Well, did you really like that? Would you want to be with that person? I don't want somebody to find my partner attractive. Whereas, I love when people find you attractive. It makes me feel good too,
Do you think you would have felt that way in one of your marriages that if your partner were looked at that way, would you have felt as secure then as you might now? Has that changed over time?
I don't know. I would have said probably I was a jealous person, but I'm trying to think about how that would have manifested for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would be more worried. I would be on the jealous side of like being abandoned, that someone was better than me, like that part, that aspect of jealousy, like compare and despair, abandonment, that sort of thing. Like someone else finding my partner attractive, I wouldn't bother me.
Right.
Because I wouldn't assume that they would go because I'm fairly securely attached. Which actually leads to the next one.
Our next, but before you leave jealousy, I'm wondering though, does a close relationship like marriage or monogamy promote jealousy? Because in a sense, it's saying, well, you're mine, this is mine, and I don't want other people touching it, looking at it, admiring it, anything, it's mine. Whereas if we're in an open relationship, do we say, well, it's that other person's ability to consent, and we have this agreement, and therefore I'm more open to the idea of being a little bit looser about it. I don't have that same idea that I own this person, but that they consent to be in this thing. So I don't own it. It's the possession's not mine. It doesn't have that kind of jealousy factor that often that factor that plays often in jealousy. We find that, that right? Because it speaks to the question of security or insecurity.
Yeah.
I need to hold it in order to have the illusion of feeling more secure.
But it's definitely something you have to work through. I'm thinking about, us being with a couple that we get together with, and, we're both very close to them, and, we have very intimate connections with them. We tell each other we love each other and that sort of thing. And for some, that could be very threatening and cause a lot of jealousy. But I don't feel jealous towards your relationship with the one partner. I don't know how you feel about mine.
No, I've reached the stage of compersion, luckily. But it's interesting because just listening to the equation simplified, overly simplified, it's like more love, too much love would make me feel jealous. It doesn't seem quite right. It's like the violence and the aggression in life is somehow more readily accepted, but love can still feel more threatening.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so we sort of alluded to number 3, which is, what is my attachment style? So knowing, so if you have an overall secure attachment style, then you're probably pretty good. But I think you might want to check up on your secure attachment if it's true secure attachment. Because sometimes when you're in a marriage, for example, you're like, oh, I feel secure in our relationship. But part of the security is more around the actual marriage, the contract, the thing that might make you feel secure. And so sometimes when you bust it open, then you go like, oh, maybe I don't feel so secure. So that's something that, you might.
So we feel secure in the institution, the conventions of marriage, but in our individual marriage, we might not be as secure as we want to feel.
Yeah, so it could activate some other patterns that are sort of dormant, like anxious attachments or avoidant. People find that in dating even, and it can be dependent on the person. Certain people can activate a certain thing depending on how they interact with us. So part of what we talk about, and I think what's part to be, is be aware of what your attachment style is, understand how it might impact you. And I think some of the things that people look at is like, look at different scenarios. Like, if this happened, how do I think I would feel? And that sort of thing. And then from that, build your secure base and safe haven.
Right. So even if you're not the most securely attached, you could still find ways of increasing your level of secure attachment. So being in a polyamorous relationship might actually be the perfect opportunity to find your ways to increase that security.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel that that's happened for you?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that in the beginning, my level of secure attachment was much lower, and I felt that going into a monogamous relationship was very threatening. I felt that it was, for a whole whatever reasons, difficult for me to be in that secure thing. But being in a open relationship really made me feel as though, well, I could have that safe haven, that secure base, but I could also go out and then see that I'm able to leave and then come back in. It's almost like having a cat that you let outside and then it comes back in, and it's like, okay, it's safe to come back in here. I can tolerate this, as opposed to my attachment style before was I would feel very anxious at the thought of being in a relationship and thought, wow, like what if I'm not able to breathe in this? What happens if I get bored? What happens if I get, whatever it might be, whatever those considerations. But seeing that I had the latitude to come and go made me feel as though a secure relationship is much more tolerable and inviting.
But also feeling like you don't have to be everything for that person.
Well,
I think
sure.
also provides some of that security as well. Like I don't have, and we shouldn't be, but I think we have this belief sometimes, or we are grown up to believe that once you get married, that person becomes your everything and they're responsible for you somehow. And so, it relieves some of that tension.
Well, yeah, because I mean, the message is that you're going to meet your forever and you're going to be together forever and ever. And what happens if you don't fall into that? What happens if you don't live up to that expectation, or it's not your experience? Will you automatically feel as though you've failed, or you're a failure, or that something is not right? Yeah. But the expectation, that whole invitation, is fraught with disappointment. It seems near impossible that one person is going to be your everything forever. Fantastic if you ever find that, but it seems unlikely, which is why more than 50% of relationships, marriages do end in divorce, and many of those that stay together might simply stay together because it's too difficult to extract themselves, right? But really, we want to know that we don't have to be the other's everything, that it kind of relieves us of that pressure in a sense, right?
Yeah, in fact, yeah, for sure. And while I would normally identify mostly as secure attachment, I definitely have had anxious patterns in the past, but I feel more secure in this relationship than I have in any other relationship in my life that's been monogamous or married or anything like that. Those actually felt more tenuous. Yeah. So speaking of attachment and security, part of the thing that helps support open relationships are successful is having well-established, like really understanding what your personal boundaries are, what your values are in your relationship, and setting up agreements so that you know how it's going to work. What do we value in our relationship? How do we want this thing to work? How are we going to maintain those aspects of our relationship that we want? And so do you have those things in place?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder how many monogamous couples, married couples, ever do make those kind of declarative statements. Whereas when we're opening it up, we are forcing ourselves. We're telling you ought to have this conversation about what's it going to be like. What are the potential, highlights and pitfalls? And we have those conversations. Again, it comes back to the idea of communication, right? Being able and needing to have those open communication.
Those are definitely essential elements. So if you don't have those things, obviously those are things that you can work on. Starting with understanding your personal boundaries and then working towards what sort of agreements would you like to have in place to make things feel good and secure, and like phasing things out. Like don't just like swing open the door and go like gangbusters. You might want to take a few steps first.
Well, we kind of that, and we made a couple of missteps over the course, right? So you don't have to only learn by fire. You can learn through other people's experience as well, right?
But luckily, I think that the saving grace for us always was the communication piece. I think if you weren't as good a communicator and we were left to my devices, we probably wouldn't have lasted this long, to be honest. Like I don't think I was a great communicator when we first got together.
I wasn't as good, but I'm better now because I had a partner like you, right? But it's interesting because you look at how big an element communication is in successful relationships, but maybe we're not where we ought to be as far as our kind of ease with it or being familiar with it, but it is a skill and we learn to communicate in those ways. So now I've learned to integrate these things, and I don't even think about it anymore, but there are modifications to my way of communicating that I never had before. I'd never learned that way, but now it's become integrated and I'm much more effective in communicating with you, with other people, and with myself. So it is a skill that we kind of get a badge for, right? We are now very good communicators, and we aspire to become excellent communicators. But even if we started from a place of little familiarity with being able to communicate our needs, we can learn how to do that, and it's a lot more accessible than you might imagine.
Yeah, and I think the thing is to have a willingness to want to communicate and to figure it out and to undo your patterns. I think that's part of it. If you don't have that willingness, then it's not going to work. You know what I mean? If you think that you're good and there's nothing you can change, then you won't change.
But sometimes we're talking about could it save our marriage? Sometimes being in heat, and I don't mean like cats in heat. I mean like being when the heat is turned up in your marriage or relationship, the pain can sometimes be a great motivator for modifying our ways of communicating.
Absolutely.
But let's not wait till we get to that point. Let's kind of address it beforehand.
Absolutely.
It gets a lot easier.
Yeah, communication has really changed, like the way we've learned different methods and how it's changed my relationship with my parents, how I interact with people, and that sort of thing. We've got a couple left. So part of it is like doing your research, so really understanding what's out there, what you're interested in,
and what you're not interested in,
and then also being comfortable with the whole idea around being in an open relationship. So because you may think, oh, on the surface this sounds really great, but really think about, oh, is this going to make me feel shameful at all? Because some people will open the relationship and still hold on to some shame or moral considerations and that sort of thing. So some of those things have to a bit unpack and how you're going to feel about it, because there's also situations, depending on if you want to come out to family or, let others know, like you don't have to, you can keep this your secret, and lots of people do. But if it's something you want to do, how you might feel if people found out, and that's the part of the piece of things that needs to be worked out.
I'm going to step out a little bit here.
Okay, step out.
And say that I can respect people not feeling comfortable coming out to their community, to their place of worship, to their employer, whatever. But I find that really unfortunate, because again, I find that there's this big moral attachment. And really what we're saying is, I want to connect with other people in loving, consensual ways. Why should that not be the most fantastic thing? What about it has to still be put underground and say, well, there's this moral consideration to it because it's not what you understand. It's not what you've experienced. So because of that, I'm going to kind of, keep it underground. I'm in a privileged position. I can acknowledge that. I'm my own boss and my family knows, and all these things, it's easier for me to do it. I get that but there's strength in numbers. If we all come out and say we are this way, then maybe this could be seen as a viable option as well. I'm not saying you have to relate this way, but it shouldn't have to be put underground as though it's so.
Yeah, but sometimes I think people feel like they have to swim up current, and you are swimming up current a bit, because the common belief, and there's shows out there like Couple to Thruple and some other things that really position non-monogamy in a way that's just about sex. And you don't see the examples of friends we hung out with this weekend. Like, the majority of what we did with them was non-sexual. And the best parts of it, I'd say, even were non-sexual. We got together, we laughed, we joked, we made dinner together, we walked, we talked.
But even if it were sexual, so what? I mean,
I know, but
the thing is, what I'm saying is that we need to stand together, because look, it wasn't that long ago, and I'm telling you, not that long ago, homosexuality in the DSM was considered a mental illness.
That's
it
true.
Was illegal. The point being that not long ago, these ways of being were considered immoral, illegal, and could even be considered a branch of insanity. What I'm saying is that as a person, I want to normalize the different ways of relating, that there should not have to be a moral attachment if it goes against what you're doing.
Exactly.
I gotta say it.
That's awesome. Okay, well, we talked about a lot of things. So can opening a relationship save your marriage? I mean, you're the one that can answer that, but if you need some help figuring it out and how to do all these things, which I think, sounds simpler, or maybe you have some of them and not all of them. Like, it's totally possible. If you think it's something that you might be interested in, then it's probably something worth investigating. So we can help. We have a digital course. We have a more deeper dive program. You can also reach out and just chat with us. Yeah. And so all the information is on our website, which is taranandre.com, or you can reach out and send us a message.
Sure can.
Awesome. If you want to explore polyamory, open up a relationship, or try your hand at swinging, we can help. Check out our website at taranandre.com for information on our Poly Newbies digital course or our deeper dive open relationship and polyamory mastery program, where you get direct coaching from us. There's also other individual and couples coaching options there as well. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast with TNA. Don't forget to subscribe and give us some love on your favorite podcasting platform. You can check out the show notes for any of the links to the courses or information we talked about today. Thanks, and have a fantastic and sexy day.